So tonight I want to share some thoughts and reflections about conditionality and about how behavior comes to be, and a view, really a practice view, a practice lens on how to understand conditionality in our own experience and as it relates to other people. And I'll explain also what I mean by conditionality. So one thing that is discovered, I'll say it's discovered in the process of kind of deep introspection, we could call it meditative introspection. It's something that I'm pointing to all the time in my teaching, and a lot of us are as we share these kinds of teachings, is that the nature of your own awareness, your own presence, being, this very primary aspect of what you are, which is here all the time. Well, that's one aspect of it, that it is here all the time. It's been with you from at least the time you were born, let's say, and is with you as the ground of experience through all of the ups and downs, ins and outs of your life, all the various stages of development. It's what allowed you to have every experience you've had, this invisible, unseen, and yet ever-present ground of all experience, which is your own wakefulness, your own awareness. It's here through sleeping, through dream state. It's what allows experience to happen. It's unnoticed because it's unlooked for, but it's also unnoticed because we're very kind of entranced with the content, with experience itself. So we tend to not notice unless we find teachings like this and engage in some degree of practice or inquiry. We tend to not notice on a shift from the experience to the experiencer. So there's this ground of being, consciousness, wakefulness, awareness, that is your nature. And we could say that it is unconditioned. There's an aspect of it that's prior even to consciousness. Consciousness appears as a result of it. Let's call it the ground of being, ground of or awareness itself, presence, and ground of presence. So this is your nature. Yeah. Actually, it's everybody's nature. And yet we all appear so different. Yeah, and we have different thoughts in our heads. We've had different life experiences. So there's this layer or level or aspect of the being or presence itself. And then, of course, there is all of the conditioned experience, which is also important, which is all of the various elements that have gone into making you, on the relative level, you as in your body and mind and your idea of who you are, and many of your genes and your reactions and your habit patterns, all of that we could call in the domain of the conditioned, right? Arises, has come to be due to conditions, myriad conditions, and many of them, most of them, not subject to your control. The family you were born into, none of this, right? This is all in the domain of the condition. So this is important because as we introspect, we start to see, not only understand this on a macro level, which is of course deeply the view of the early Buddhist tradition. If you read in the early discourses of the Buddha, it's all descriptions of conditionality, of causes and conditions. That's another way of talking about it. Everything arises, everything in the world, everything in nature arises due to myriad causes and conditions. And that is true with your own mind and body. It's even true with your behavior from moment to moment. So as we introspect, I'm hoping once you get a little bit concentrated, a little quiet inside, you can start to see this. Wow, I don't choose the feelings that arise. I don't choose the thoughts that arise. I don't choose the reactions I have. You don't. You don't choose whether you find something pleasant or unpleasant. You don't choose the mood you're going to be in today. And you don't choose a lot of the events that condition or give rise to the mood you might be in. It's very humbling, but it's also very important for us to see the degree to which this is true. It's kind of the basis, actually, of forgiving yourself. Yeah, of forgiving yourself. It's not a forgiveness that's like, it's a forgiveness that comes from understanding. It's the only way I know really to not take yourself personally, your conditioning personally. Yeah, you see. Yeah, so that's a wonderful thing about practice, as you start to see that, oh, wow. I think it's very important, because also we start to then understand a little bit that other people are this way too. So earlier this week, I shared a teaching from a short line from Shantideva, the 8th century Mahayana, just an amazing being, and had his teachings are known. It's sort of a description of the path as he understood it. It's really a kind of bringing together of the Mahayana Buddhist teachings. But I shared a line there, which I thought would be very important for all of us to reflect on, right? And I'm going to read the exact quote, but the crux of it was, when somebody hits us with a stick, we don't get angry at the stick. In the same way, but of course we get angry at the person, because the person is the one who hit us with the stick. But in the same way, the person is driven, like the stick, is moved by an emotion, a reaction. So that was the image. I'm going to read you the line in translation, of course. It says, although it is their sticks that hurt me, I'm angry at the ones who wield them, striking me. But they, in turn, are driven by their hatred. Therefore, with their hatred, I should take offense. I'll read that again. Although it is their sticks that hurt me, I am angry at the ones who wield them, striking me. But they, in turn, are driven by their hatred. Therefore, with their hatred, I should take offense. So tonight I want to approach this from a few different angles. I'm going to reference some very old Buddhist teachings. I'm going to reference some modern scientists and some great leaders of our time, one particularly. So I want us to sit with that. And I want this to not just be something you hear from me, but something you inquire into in your own experience. The degree to which this is true in your own behavior and in the behavior of others. This is a real practice view. We start to see, wow, we don't choose our states, we don't choose our reactions or the degree of power that they have. If you are practicing, and awareness is part of the set of conditions that's present, and of course, before you practice, it isn't. Lucid awareness, mindfulness. When that's been cultivated, there is a chance, and it's not actually up to you when it does kick in, there's a chance that mindfulness will be part of that condition. Say you're the one, hopefully not hitting someone with a stick, but you're the one with the anger and the reactivity about it. And yeah, of course, if mindfulness is present, that might affect your relationship to that. And it may not end in expressing through violence or through repression. But without that aspect, well, we see all around us. So I was earlier this week, I heard a lecture from somebody I admire, Robert Sapolsky, who is a primatologist. Many of you, I'm sure, know his work, a primatologist and a neuroscientist. I think he either is or was at Stanford. And he, many, many years ago, maybe it was in the 80s or something, had a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. So he did a lot of research on stress. And I encourage you to kind of look up some of his stuff. He's a great speaker. And so he was studying, I think, orangutans for many years. I might be wrong, it might be a different primate, but and really looking at how they cause each other social stress, because apparently that's, it only takes them about 3 hours a day to get their basic food needs met. And then they're like the rest, they're like us. They spend the rest of the time trying to figure out how to stress each other out. And apparently they're good at it. And so he was studying their physiology for many years, a lot of very interesting insights, but also doing interesting work on, like kind of looking at human behavior. And so his more recent book, which is a few years old, is called Behave. And it's I have it here, but as with so many of my books, I've taken off the cover. So let's see what the subtitle is. Yeah, The Biology of Humans at Our Best and Worst. It's a super interesting read. But I'm bringing this up because he lays out, from a science standpoint, he really is looking at how behavior comes to be. And it's basically an in-depth study in conditionality. Almost, I would say, it's a scientific description of what those early Buddhist teachings are about, minus the liberation side, right? So it's just a description of how behavior comes to be, but it's missing the thing of what do we do about it, except for a little bit, right? But from that standpoint, it is an incredibly useful description. And he starts out basically looking at the moment before a behavior occurs, what's happening in the biology. And he goes back, how about hours before, days before, years before? He looks at, early childhood, the conditions that our bodies and minds develop in utero, looks at kind of genetic inheritance and also kind of epigenetic phenomena, and talks about intergenerational trauma. It's super interesting and a very broad interdisciplinary description of why we do anything from moment to moment. From the hormones that are secreted just moments before we act or react to something. Now, if you practice and you really are observing yourself, this is not going to be new to you. Some of the research is fascinating. It's very interesting, and all of the biology was new to me, right? But the principle of it will not be new. This is talking about, well, what affects the hormones that are secreted in the minutes before somebody cuts you off and you yell at them or try to chase them down. Yeah. The presence of that hormone or the absence of it might affect the degree of your reaction. Do you dial up your hormones on purpose? No, it's like so many factors. Yeah. And he traces it back in a beautiful interdisciplinary arc. Yeah. And so all of this conditionality is, and so his view is so interesting. Although I think, again, without the liberative side of what do we do about this, there can be, I've noticed in people, just even the questions that I heard asked, a little bit of a sense of kind of even almost determinism or futility or lack of agency, because he talks a lot about how much of this doesn't have to do with free will, like you deciding, you choosing your destiny. But one of the things that I think is very powerful about his description, and I can hear it in his teaching, is the compassion, that comes about when we have this view. we have this understanding, we look at people and their behavior differently. And this is true whether you read the biology side or not. Just from the meditative introspection, you can learn enough on a first-person level. I think it's very useful for us also to have this kind of developmental view, epigenetic view. All of the descriptions of the biology is very interesting too. But what's interesting, I can hear this in what he says, is it gives rise to a tremendous sense of compassion. Yeah, because we tend to essentialize, like, oh, there's something about you. I'm holding you responsible. There's something at the core that's the you that's responsible for this. It's not understanding that what drives the person that drives the stick. Yeah, and how that comes to be, and how impersonal that actually is. And so I heard him on a different, this was years ago, I had heard him on a different talk, and somebody said to him, a very interesting question, asked him, this is my memory of it, what is the thing in 100 years that we're going to look back, and maybe it wasn't 100 years, that we're going to look back at, and we're going to look at it the way we look now at the way 100 years ago people viewed epilepsy. Whereas 100 years ago, people viewed epilepsy as like demonic possession, stuff like that. As soon as we had science, we understood this is, what a horrible, horrible miscarriage of justice to see it that way. How tragic that is. He said, what are the things that 100 years we're going to look at that way? And he said something like, almost everything related to criminal justice. That's serious. Yeah. I mean, that's an amazing statement, right? That if we actually understood, from someone who understands the conditionality at this level of the, he talks a lot in here also about the effects of poverty on the mind and body, on the biology, the effects of racism, discrimination, the effects of trauma, and so there's a tremendous compassion, understanding. It's the understanding that gives rise to compassion. That's very different than pity. It's like, oh, if we understood the web of conditionality, we wouldn't be full of blame in the same way. Yeah. So I wanted to start with that. And that leaves us in a certain place, but we're not going to stop there. But actually, to add to this view, so what do we do with conditionality, and what does practice? I studied baboons. Thank you. Somebody just put in the things that Sapolsky studied baboons. It wasn't orangutans. Thank you. See? Was it, this conditionality, that knowledge evaporated. It's very interesting. So when I heard people asking questions, there's a lot of questions about, so what do I do about it? Especially this thing of like how little we control in terms of what's arising, or the way it's arising, or the strength with which it's arising. Yeah. But he also told a very interesting story. It was like an anecdote that I think is a good branch for us to start talking about what we do about this from a practice standpoint, how we can view it. So he described how he was driving on the highway and saw somebody's bumper sticker which said, "Practice random acts of kindness." And just after he passed that person, the car came to cut him off and kind of pull in front of him. And he noticed the impulse to kind of like race ahead so the car couldn't come in. Many of you can relate to that impulse. Oh, no, you don't, And, but he noticed that he actually pressed the brake and let the car go. And he related that to seeing that bumper sticker just a few seconds before. There's a lot of very interesting stuff in his book about priming, kind of what happens in the moments before we experience something, either somebody needing help or somebody saying something threatening, how what we experience moments before, what we're primed with, affect the way we see it, experience it, and affect the way we respond. So something very interesting in that, right? Talking about, oh, even my programming, even the kind of unfolding set of conditions can be affected just by seeing a bumper sticker. I'm sure he's seen many, many times. Practice random acts of kindness. So I'm not saying this so you all go out and buy bumper stickers, although maybe that's what they're for. But one of the things that we're doing as we practice like this, and just in the meditative practice, but this actually also applies to how we want to approach change in the world, is that we have to practice with an understanding of conditionality. That's what's called in the early Buddhist teaching, mundane right view. Right view has to do with understanding conditionality, how things come to be as a result of conditions. If we don't understand that, it's very hard to work with complex systems because we just approach them with brute force, and that's probably not enough condition to change it. It's certainly not true in relation to yourself. Haven't you tried to approach yourself with some brute force at times? And how long does that last? How well does that work? I'm just going to do it differently. I'm just going to try harder. I'm just going to kind of castigate myself until I do it. Yeah, I'll just work harder. Sometimes that's enough to get you over a hump, but that's not enough. Yeah, that doesn't work long term. It doesn't work in a profound way. It doesn't work in a system transforming way. We deeply understand conditionality when it comes to nature. I should say we intuitively understand it. And I've used that metaphor before about how, if you see a tree that is wilting in a drought and you want to care for the tree, you would intuitively understand that you have to attend to the conditions that the tree finds itself in. Maybe something about the soil, certainly watering it, maybe shading it. And I don't know what else you do with a tree, but you would understand that it was on that level. Yeah. And you would approach it understanding that this is a result of causes and conditions. So we need to approach this system in the same way. One of the things that is a powerful condition, so think of Robert Sapolsky just seeing that bumper sticker. And now think of you coming into contact with the Dharma or the liberative teachings. That is a powerful condition. That's why in the tradition they talk about, and this is, in all of the Buddhist traditions, they talk about the preciousness karmically of coming into contact with the teachings and how rare it is, how rare and precious. And part of the reason it's so precious is because it's the contact with the teaching that is the precondition for you even being able to do anything with it or learning how to approach your own mind in this way. That's why the gift of the Dharma is considered such a powerful gift, just to expose somebody to it. But that's also true with any knowledge you expose somebody to. Yeah, until you have that idea, it might never arise for you. Yeah. Then you hear it, all of a sudden, oh, that's within the proximate. Yeah, now I can think more about that. Now I can pursue that. So if we look at the web of conditionality, we say, what are the inputs that what are the upstream things that we can affect? Yeah. And this is where understanding how do you want to influence your mind, how influencing your mind needs to be thought of as through a web of conditionality. Yeah. It's not just like one thing. One thing is not systemic, right? That's why in Buddhist temples, you have iconography everywhere and you have bells ringing and you have, people walking around doing or on retreat doing the same kind of thing. And that's powerful because it just gets it in your head a lot. You're steeped in it. That's why hearing teachings is so important. Just because those Dharma thoughts are then in your mind stream, you might remember them. Maybe some of you just remembered that story, as I did after I revisited it in a moment where I was feeling a reaction to something somebody else did. The thought arose of the stick metaphor. And immediately I felt a shift of experience just from the arising of that teaching, just from seeing differently. So think of your practice not just as meditating. Think of it as about your whole life. And that's why in all of those traditional teachings, there's so much emphasis on things like what you associate with, who you associate with. Right? And I'm not saying only associate with, if we only associated with the wise, we'd never hang out by the traditional definitions of that. But you could think about the web of conditionality that you've invited in, whether it's, and that includes the wholesome influences, the ones that point you back toward Dharma, towards awareness, the things that remind you to be awake, like some people do when you're around them, or some kinds of teachings or various ways that you set up your own space at home. And there are also things that really take you in the domain in other directions, right? And I don't know what they are for you. I know for a lot of people, a lot of those things reside in these strange objects, which we call them phones, but actually they are portals to endless stuff. Yeah. But also what you read, what you think about, affects the way you see. What you dwell upon in your own mind affects what you're thinking about in various moments. That's why I think, and I just say, I remember, it's a little aside, but when they were doing various of the teacher trainings at Spirit Rock, after, I did that many years ago, many years ago. And thinking about how, thinking with some people about the future teacher trainings and what is important for teachers. And one of the things that occurred to me, although I don't think that anybody did this, was I thought, well, what would I really want teachers who are working with people deeply? What do I think would influence them well? And one of my thoughts was, I think they should read 19th century novels. Because I think those novels have such incredible description of a variety of inner experiences, Russian novels. And I'm thinking of just the ones that I was affected by, but just these novels that have great detailed description of the interiority of human experience. Yeah, from people who are maybe very different than one, in different walks of life, different experiences, different. So that's, I think, so important. I think it's important right now, too, in terms of what we're exposed to, even as we talk about all of this racial injustice that's happening, and people are thinking, how do we be better allies? How do we, and I do think that what we seed our consciousness with in terms of stories that facilitate understanding, that is transformative too. I think of all of that as part of the web of conditionality. Again, this isn't to say you shouldn't watch TV or you shouldn't, be normal and do stuff that's just fun, but just good to understand, oh, in a way, we're the sum total of the conditions that are present. So that's just speaking of your life and how you live. Telling the truth and having that as a value. So your values, remembering your values is something that affects conditionality. Having things like telling the truth and practicing that, having that as a practice, right? That affects so much of what flows out in your life, but it also affects what comes back to you. It affects how you are in relationship to your experience, because when you tell the truth more, or let's say it's not always tell the truth, because of course there's truths that are not useful to tell, but you're in relationship to truth internally in your own experience. I'm just giving a few examples of that. But as we practice mindfulness, of course, now we're in a whole other territory, mind moment by mind moment, you're cultivating, you're nurturing lucid presence. That's why this practice is so important. Right? You're nurturing concentration, which is stability of mind. These mental factors. And the Buddha actually, and after the Buddha, they got very geeky about breaking down in the commentaries and stuff, and also in something called the Abhidhamma. They got very detailed about breaking down mind moment by mind moments, what's happening in terms of mental factors. Just like, it's almost like the Buddhist equivalent of what Robert Sapolsky is doing with like parts of the brain and different, neuronal synapses and hormones and stuff like that. Sort of like mental description of experience based on mental factors. And it's almost like, it's hard to know what to do with it, except on the general level, sort of useful to understand, oh yeah. Yeah, but if you get too in the weeds, it's a little bit like trying to live. It's hard to live on that microscopic level, but mind moment by mind moment, we're having these new elements introduced. Now, are you, and it's so interesting about how just like what we cultivate, meaning what we do in this moment, actually affects what happens in the next moment. What you expose yourself to, bumper stickers, or remembering to be aware, remembering to notice awareness or to be aware. A lot of what we call practice is just conditioning this habit of remembering to notice awareness, and that becoming stable. As I said the other day, your own state of concentration of the collectedness of your mind is fluctuating through the day, even if you practice, due to conditions. Sometimes the mind is very calm and collected. Of course, if you practice, the chances are when it's collected, it will be much more collected than if you'd never practiced. And it'll be much more collected, let's call it, I don't know the statistical term, but like generally it will be, statistically it will be more collected than it would have been otherwise, and especially as you continue to practice. But still, concentration will fluctuate through the day. When the mind is gathered and concentrated and powerful like that, your response to things is totally different. Little things, just big things even, some of them can become very workable. When your concentration is very brittle, the mind is very scattered, little things can be very hard to be present with. That's from this mental factor, let's just call it, of concentration, being kind of robust or brittle, scattered. So that's why practice really is so important too, because that aspect, that gets strengthened over time as we practice. I was talking to somebody who's an investor, and investors, I don't know anything about that territory, but let's talk about how like and I don't know if it's true anymore because everything's different. Maybe everything's different. Maybe everything's not fundamentally different, but just the market keeps generally over time goes up. And I just, of course, I always think about practice stuff. I say like, okay, on any given day, it could be up or down, or there could be a pandemic. It could be way down. It could be way down. It could be way up. But over time, tends to go up. Yeah. And the same is true with practice. As we cultivate these qualities, as we practice, mindfulness, awareness, concentration, stability, clear seeing, in any day, that could be way up or way down. Yeah. However, over time, whatever that is called, deepening. Yeah. In the aggregate. Yeah. I think there's somebody popped up something on the chat, I think, about the right term, but I don't want to go look for it. But I'm sure there's a correct term for that. So this is why your practice matters. This is why what you do matters. And it's not that you should be like, obsessive about it, or now everything, it's not about what thoughts, sometimes people say like, oh, the condition matters, so I shouldn't have certain thoughts, because they'll condition other things. And sometimes there's weird new age theory like that, it's sort of like half right and understands that, oh yeah, the thoughts in your mind affect you. but it misunderstands the conditionality part, that you don't decide what thoughts are there, but how you meet them, just meeting them, having awareness be more often part of the equation. That's a game changer, right? Then there's just more of a chance that there'll be some choicefulness in response to what arises. Huge valence and awareness, when awareness is spacious, it's okay. Yeah. That's a big deal. Yeah. More of a chance that concentration will be present. And yet, still the humility to understand that if the stability isn't strong enough, you will still say the thing that you told yourself not to say. You will. It's just, it's fairly impersonal. It's still important that you take responsibility for it. You can't just say, oh, this is just, I read the book. It's just conditions. No. Not taking responsibility is another condition. That belief that it's just, that could condition. So it's actually very important to take responsibility, to take tremendous responsibility, to have that be something you cultivate too, but also to actually have a wise understanding about this nature. And so now I talked a little bit about the individual level. On the collective level, it's so important that we understand this so that we can actually heal our community and our society as we work for justice rather than tear it apart and tear each other apart. Because if we look at people we disagree with, or we look at people causing harm, and we see agents of, and we don't see conditionality, we are going to make those people evil. And then we will cause unending conflict. So I want to read something here. This is from Martin Luther King on something that he, let's see what specific piece is this from? This is an early article that he wrote on nonviolence and racial justice. He says, he's talking about nonviolence here. He says, the third characteristic of this method is that the attack is directed against forces of evil rather than against persons who are caught in those forces. It is evil we are seeking to defeat, not the persons victimized by evil. I should read that. I'm going to read that one more time just so that you can reflect on it. A third characteristic of this method is that the attack is directed against forces of evil rather than against persons who are caught in those forces. It is evil we are seeking to defeat, not the persons victimized by evil. And he would often say, this is not a tension, this is, the tension is not between white people and black people, it's between justice and injustice. It's such a powerful, moving understanding and expression of this truth. How many of us can carry that kind of seeing the way he could when people are trying to kill you? That is a whole other level. And so for those of us who are not in immediate danger, or what's our excuse? What's our excuse for not inquiring? For not trying to see more deeply, to see this nature, this pristine nature that I referenced at the beginning, this unconditioned nature. When you look at a baby and you just see non-conceptual mind, you just see purity. Nobody sees anything but purity when you look at a baby. Yeah. We're all of this nature. That's before the conditioning got ramped up. Can we see this nature, this pure nature, this sky-like nature of mind in every other being that we cross paths with? it's here. It's here to be seen. It's here to be recognized. The conditioning may be totally different. Somebody you completely have nothing in common with. This you have in common. You have a lot of other things in common in terms of feelings and thoughts and emotions. The basic is the same for all of us. But we really, there are many experiences you don't share, but this we all share. This nature. So we must challenge ourselves to see this nature and to also see the conditionality. As Martin Luther King doesn't say, oh, this is the forces of, he calls it evil, right? Because some of this conditioning is very, very dangerous. Yeah. It's so dangerous as to be able to call it evil, right? But he doesn't say, well, just let that just be, okay, it's just conditions. No, he says, we want to help liberate people from this conditioning. Yeah, that was the Buddhist premise. We want to be liberated from ignorance about our own nature, our own being, because it's the lack of understanding of our own nature that leads us to be completely locked in the conditioning. Now, some of our conditioning too. So this element, this sky-like nature, that's our underlying nature as humans. And yet, you know, the ideologies, the racism that's in the systems is in the minds. Right? It's in our minds. It has to be, because it's been in the history, it's been in the culture, so it's in our minds. And that's the place, as I spoke about a few weeks ago, that we need to deal with it. And there's also in Robert Sapolsky's book a very powerful chapter on us and them. And there's some very unsettling research in there about, you know, some of our wiring, you know, like that children at very young ages, you know, find faces that look different from theirs, and different races, and the more different, find the rest, you know, tend to find them more threatening. That it's harder to recognize, that children, you know, learn to recognize faces that look more like the ones that they're exposed to. And actually, that's the ones that they're exposed to. That's a very interesting research, right? So if a child is adopted at an early age, regardless of what race they are, they recognize the faces that they're around. Actually, maybe there's an important lesson in that about what our community could be. Yeah, about just what we can recognize in each other. But anyway, some of that we need to acknowledge. And that's why I think some of that science is so important. We need to acknowledge that and work with it. One of the most powerful things I think about mindfulness is that we see very clearly you are not, your conditioning is not a sentence, right? It's not a life sentence. That's something we learn directly. Oh, sure, there's conditioning. And yet there's this cultivation affects the way we relate to this conditioning. And we can be liberated from, maybe not from having it arise, but from being ruled by it. Whether it's the thoughts in our heads, the feelings in our body, the conditioned reactions, you know, the attitudes, the views, the opinions, those are not fixed. And of course, all the research on neuroplasticity gives us a scientific understanding of how we can actually change our own minds too. Through what we do, what we're exposed to. So there's a lot more we could say about this, but I think I should stop here so that we can leave some room to dialogue. Just thinking if there's any last piece I want to say. I think that's okay for now. So in the time we have left, I'm going to let me turn the chat back on, or maybe it was on the whole time. and I didn't successfully turn it off. Oh yeah, I'll change that. Oh yeah, so let's see. Maybe somebody could post Robert Sapolsky's name. Show you the title page. You see that? Okay. Oh yeah, somebody posted it. And somebody wrote, "Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers" is a 1994 book. I just thought it was from the 80s because I used to see it. It was in my dad's office. I guess could it be 94? Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm going to move to the Q&A now for a bit. And so someone posted just something in the Q&A that I think I'll just read. This is interesting. Maybe you could post this in the chat too. The collective conditioning is approached by Augusto Boal. I don't know how to pronounce it. With the theater of the oppressed, he talks about the collective conditioning that we integrated as the cops in the head. I see. And the practice of the theater of the oppressed as a way to reveal that conditioning and to try to change them collectively. Interesting. Somebody asked, do you mind sharing what some of your favorite novels have been? I was just, Tolstoy and Dostoevsky were the ones I was thinking about, like Anna Karenina and War and Peace and Brothers Karamazov and things like that. Just those, but also like, what's her name? George Eliot and Dickens, of course. This is just these novels that really get at and this, of course, I'm sure there are more modern novels. I think, my wife read Americana, which I didn't read yet, but that apparently sounds like that, and some others lately. I'm sure there's so many, but anyway, just those are some of the ones that I was affected by. Turgenev. Let's see. So some of these are anonymous, and some of you, I will just I'll unmute you for and to share, and some of them I'll just read. So this one's anonymous, so I'll just read it. It says, do you have any suggestions when one finds themselves ruminating excessively on painful thoughts during hard times? The teachings on our mind's relationship to thoughts resonate with me on an intellectual level, but I find it very difficult to be in touch with awareness when I'm experiencing swirls of really difficult thoughts and emotions. Yeah. That's important. I think a lot of people can relate to that, especially now. And these are very challenging times. And they were challenging when it was just the pandemic, right? And now, but they're very, very, they're very challenging. But anytime, inspiring too. There's some like great social change, I think, in the works. Hopefully it won't get kind of like passed over. And that's why I think this long-term view around conditions is so important. If we want to have change that's lasting, we really have to look at the web of causality more broadly. Yeah. So like what what nurtures what leads to what, and what can sustain changes once they're made. And many of you know that from, you need sometimes you have an insight and it's like, oh, everything will be different now, but the conditions aren't present to support it ongoing. They're just not there yet. And so the insight kind of passes. And then often, and this happens for a lot of times for people practicing, as you continue to practice, it's almost like, and I noticed this a lot over years, it's like have an insight, kind of like there wasn't enough to support it. And then there'd be sort of like a period where I wasn't sure what was happening, maybe a gradual cultivation. And then at some point that would be experienced again or land in a different way. And actually the conditions would be there to support it continuing. So that's, but when you find yourself ruminating excessively on painful thoughts, I'll just say a few things, since it's important to notice the relationship between thoughts and emotions. Now, if you don't have a practice ongoing, that's why I'm teaching the meditation practice. It's almost like it's very hard to work with the mind unless there's a little bit of cultivation there. You can start, but it's like you won't be able to watch your thoughts and have any space, or be with really strong feelings that engender thoughts or thoughts that engender feelings. That's why the training is so important. And that's why I encourage all of you, don't neglect your training. And that's why the meditation in the mornings is just a meditation, so that you practice. That's my goal for you. Because you can hear a lot of teachings in many places, but the practice piece is usually what's missing. And so most people can understand, oh, these are just thoughts, these are just feelings. So one thing you can do, just very practical, is you can shift your attention to something else. You can do something very invigorating that kind of like shifts the energy in the body. And so if we just think about conditions, a lot of times we don't notice that the energetic quality of experience, like say you're feeling really lethargic or down, and then the mind states kind of get going, and there's kind of like, so get up and do some very vigorous exercise. Yeah, very vigorous exercise. Just flush the system with blood, and you're sort of pumping it through, and it gets the energy up, almost the adrenaline up. That can actually move the mind in a very powerful way. Yeah. Then maybe sit down and try to watch the mind. Yeah. Once you've like revved things up or invigorated it. So sometimes just shifting what you're doing, or doing something that's compelling, talking to somebody. These are just ways to kind of support yourself in not being totally lost in it. But then when you are in a place where there's some stability and a little bit of balance, then you can go looking for trouble. Then you can go, I'm going to watch this. I'm going to see, how does this arise? Not to bear it, but to understand it. Does it arise first as a feeling? Am I in a certain mood and then thoughts conform to that? Or do I just have a random thought about something and then it gives rise to a big emotion, and then that emotion fuels more thoughts, and you can start to watch the cycle. Yeah? Then you can get out of it when you need to, go run around the block, what have you. But that way you're beginning this process of observing. Yeah, this is just there's conditioned phenomena, but until the concentration and the mindfulness are strong enough, you won't just be able to watch it and have it be like, okay, and sort of still be lost in it. So basically, there are many things you can do, but the main thing you need to do is practice and be interested. Be interested in really understanding, how does this come to be? Can I just, like I'm a scientist, we're trying to observe it in my own experience. Yeah? And then it still won't be easy, right? Because human beings have been ruled by their minds since the beginning of time, or I don't know the beginning of time, since we had all this architecture up here, and maybe more now than ever. But we are really ruled by this. So be very gentle and kind with yourself, and not in a rush, because this is, even a little bit of freedom will be a lot, but just, you have to approach it with some kindness and some deference, because, this conditioning has been going on for a bit. So John D'Souza, John, would you mind? I was gonna try to find you in the list and maybe ask you to ask your question out loud, just so we can have some other voices. What I'll do is I'm gonna find you on here. Let's see. I'm sorry, it's Joe. Sorry, Joe. It's Joe D'Souza. So I'm gonna unmute you, allow you to talk. And would you mind? Do you want to say? I see your picture. Nice to see you. Do you want to ask it out loud, or I could just respond to what you wrote? But I think it's a great question.
Sure. I can ask it out loud. Yeah,
Thank
I've
you.
been on your father's retreat for the past 13 weeks, and he often asks when he guides us through our meditations in the morning, how is it in the mind right now? What's in your mind?
Yeah.
And then he follows it up with what's in your body. And I think you did the same today. And but he followed it up with a third question often, which, how is it known? And I didn't get a chance to ask him what he meant by how is it known. And I asked a few people on the breakout groups, and some gave me long-winded answers, and some gave succinct answers. And I thought you might be in a good position to help explain what is meant by how is it known. Though I got a few insights from your guidance and explanations and discussions and your words that you went through today.
Yeah.
The conditioning and things like that, and how we are there's so many factors that impact our attention from the time we are born, when we don't have any language, and genetics and all of that. So I got a feel for your answer. But I'd like to hear your words again, if you could, just maybe to give me a fresh take.
Yeah, sure. And so let me ask you one other question, though. So it sounds like the first part of his instruction, how is it in the mind right now? Or how is it in the body? What do you do with that?
That brings me back to awareness with the present moment, because I'm aware that my mind had wandered somewhere, and I'm aware of the thoughts that may be in my mind.
Yeah.
And when he asks, how is it in the body, I might be feeling some sensations, some palpitations or whatever. And I think I was just wondering, what are the different ways that what's in the mind can be known, or what's in the body can be known? Is it just the sensations, the thoughts, the feelings?
So this is a very great question, because it touches into the difference between the experience, like the object, right? Which you pointed to, you said, and when he says, how is it known? And the awareness that's allowing it to be known, right? That's knowing it. Actually, you said that in your response. I said, well, what do you do with the first part? And you said, well, I'm aware of my mind and what's happening. And you said aware. There's awareness of the mind. So and this is important, because there's lots of different aspects of mind that can be known. Like you said, like there's thoughts, there's states, like the mind can be collected or scattered. It can be calm or restless. Yeah. And the mind can have a sort of like a flavor to it, like or right. Also, of course, there's even there are like gross level thoughts, there's sort of background thoughts. There's a lot that can be known. There can even the process of like perceiving can be known. But I think in the how is it known, it's an unanswerable question. But it's supposed to put you back in noticing the awareness. That's the purpose of it. You say, how is it known? It's sort of like saying, known by what? See? Known by what? So right now, all of you listening to this, and you, Joe, is like you're having some experience right now. Maybe it's like some of you are wondering, like, well, what's Will talking about? And that's an experience that you can know. Something is here knowing it. So he says, how is it known? So I say, like, what is knowing it? Then all of you will then go look for the thing that's known. But if you do, you won't find anything, right? So that's the kind of, it's not a trick question, but like you won't, because awareness isn't a thing. But basically his question is just to put you back into noticing that awareness is allowing it to happen. Noticing awareness. It's almost like noticing awarenessing, like you can notice seeing, but you can't see your eyes, but you can notice seeing. Oh, what's appearing, right? Same way you can notice, awareness. Does that make sense?
Makes excellent sense. Thank you. That was fantastic.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you. It's a great question. So it's a tough one to like articulate, but I'm glad that
I'm glad I got it from you, because you're the closest to John Kabat-Zinn that I could think of.
Yeah, but we won't always agree on everything. So, but I'm glad.
Well, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Okay, let's see. So we're almost out of time for tonight because I try to end on time, but let's see. Let's see if there's a short one. So just to say, since we only have a few minutes, I might so here I'll just read a quick one. But again, I hope you'll take what was shared tonight and just actually let me go back to the participants for a second. All right, I can't figure out how to do this, but so I think I'll stop there because the other questions they're great questions, but they're kind of fuller, and I want to end on time for those of you who do that, and maybe I'll hang out a little bit afterwards, and I can, if anybody wants to stick around for a bit, we can talk a little more. But I hope you will take just what what I spoke about tonight and work with it in your own experience, so that you're really it's your inquiry. Again, as I've said so many times, it's really the unfolding, and this is again the piece that I want to support is it comes from moments of wakefulness. Comes from you nourishing that in yourself, kind of nourishing, honoring this nature, your nature. And so I hope you will all continue to do that, to observe the conditioning from the space, from awareness itself. Yeah, I hope that you will be kind to what's arising, understanding from that comes from that understanding. It's like you're not even ordering it up. It's conditions, just like nature. You don't blame nature for things. You don't, but that understanding with your own conditioning, it's just like nature unfolding. And yet, if you care, and I hope you do, then you can affect the conditions. You can bring your understanding of conditionality into how you approach your own mind and body, your relationships, the life you live on a daily level, and hopefully our greater community, so that we can develop a more just and equitable and loving community, as a country, and as a world. So so just a little announcement is for those of you, I hope you will come and sit in the mornings. We'll be here 7 a.m. Pacific time. I usually leave the meditations up on YouTube if you want to sort of look at them later in the day, if you're in a different time zone or something, if you want to sit later. And also, if you want to donate to support this offering, you could do that at our sundaysangha.net website. There's a little place there with some links that you can donate if you want to support this offering. And I thank you for that too. So let's sit for a few moments and just formally close. So may each one of us, each of you, in our own way, continue to look deeply into the nature of things and into the nature of our own mind and body, our own conditioning, and hopefully as well into our unconditioned nature. And in this process, may we be willing to see things as they are. And may this clear seeing free us. And may this be for the benefit not only of ourselves, but also of our families, our communities, hopefully by extension, all beings everywhere.